One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Take your first round of playoff rankings, drop them in a blender, and press play. Here on Monday morning, we're left to pick up the pieces and reassemble the puzzle in time for Tuesday's rankings that we're going to try and project forward, and a ranking that gives Trey an ultimate spicy take he's promised to unleash on us in just a few minutes. Welcome along, everybody, to the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. I'm Mitch Mason, joined by Trey Reeves and Garrett Turney per usual. Fellas, Saturday was an electric day of college football. We had upsets all over the place. The SEC West is suddenly wide open again, and for the first time in what feels like human history, Alabama and Clemson might have been eliminated from playoff contention on the same day. Are we rejoicing with the masses today?
Oh yeah, no, it is so good to have some variety. You know, obviously neither of those teams won it last year. We're going to talk about Georgia probably being number one, team to beat, repeat, champ, all that stuff like that. Totally get it. But I'm so glad that you're starting to get some of these old names out of there and starting to get some new names in, maybe get a little bit of changing of the guard, get some new flags up on the wall. And yeah, I'm excited to break it down with you guys.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge day for college football. Yesterday was an amazing day to be a fan of the sport. It's an amazing day to look forward to the college football playoff this year because it's been absolute carnage since week 1, since week 0, really. And I'm here for it, man. I don't think we're done yet. I think anytime that Kansas reaches bowl eligibility, stuff gets crazy. And so I'm
Sure.
here for a 2007-esque finish.
Oh,
Rock
for
Chalk.
sure. Yeah. Hey, we talked about it in the preview. I had a good feeling that we were going to be partying in Lawrence. Couple of wins for Kansas and their social media team. We'll get to all of that in due time. Trey, you've got a spicy take. I want to get to it, and it's wrapped up with our question of the day. So let me get the housekeeping out of the way. Couple of announcements as we debuted on last week's show. We're on YouTube now. Head over to YouTube, search the Three Technique, find us there. If you would drop us a subscription, a like on this video if you're watching it currently, or any of the videos that you might see in the future or past, please give us a like. It helps us grow the show. Also follow us on social media at 3TechPod on Twitter and Instagram. You can email us too if you'd like, 3techpod@gmail.com. Get all your sizzling, spicy takes. If you hear this from Trey and think, oh, yeah, I've got one that can top it, let us have it. DM us, email us. Let's get into it. Gentlemen, it's all wrapped up in the question of the day. As we get version 2, run it back of these playoff ranks that we had some issue with, a lot of people around the country had issue with. Question of the day, how far back is too far back in our new rankings? Now, we're going to read off our names, our list of teams that we believe are still eligible for the college football playoff. If you're listening to this after the playoff rankings have come out, this is not what those at the Gaylord Texan and Grapevine have come up with yet. We'll talk about that on Thursday's show. This is what we would do if we were ranking those teams. So I'll turn it over to you guys first. And Trey, let's start with you because I'm just so excited to hear this. List off kind of your teams that you believe are still in it, still in the hunt for postseason glory, and ultimately how far back is too far back in the rankings to contend for the playoff.
Yeah, so this is not going to be my projection of the college football playoff rankings on Tuesday night because who knows what they're going to do. I think we have a pretty good idea of who's going to be number 1 and probably 2, 3, 4. The order is definitely up for debate. But for me, I have a lot of teams still alive for the college football playoff because my spicy hot take is I don't think we have any teams finish conference championship week undefeated in the FBS. We have 4 still undefeated.
Wow.
Wow.
We have Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, and TCU. None of those 4 will be undefeated after conference championship week. Write it down right now.
Wow.
Mark this spot on the Week 10 recap podcast. None of those 4 will be undefeated after conference championship week. So go look up their schedules if you want. There are some opportunities to trip up for all 4 of those teams, starting with this upcoming week for a couple of them. But because of that, the teams that I still have realistically having some sort of a shot. Now, it could be a 1% chance. Okay. I'm not saying that any of these are likely, especially when I get down my list, but I've got Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, Tennessee, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Clemson. Yes, Clemson, even though they lost to Notre Dame yesterday, North Carolina, and the champion, whoever rises out of the ashes of the SEC West, which is just a complete rubble wasteland right now. Whoever rises out of the ashes of that division will have a shot, especially if they can knock off Georgia. So that's a long list. I realize that. I acknowledge that. But I legitimately think all of those teams are still mathematically alive for the college football playoff.
I mean, I can't see anybody coming out of the SEC West, honestly. I mean, that many losses at this point in the season. I mean, I don't know. I could see it.
But think back to 2017. If Auburn knocks off Georgia
Yeah.
in the SEC championship game, they are undoubtedly
Yeah.
in the college football playoff with 2 losses. So if LSU gets there with 2 losses, if Ole Miss could still get there with 1 loss, if they can
Yeah.
knock off
I mean,
Alabama this week. So
I guess okay. Technically, you're talking about possibilities, and you would have to have stuff fall your
the
way where
question
everybody
was who's still
loses.
alive, and all
Yeah.
those
That
teams are
was a
still
question.
alive.
To
Well,
be
okay.
fair,
I
that
mean, I
was a
guess
question.
look, Ohio State could lose the next 4, and then let's see what, or the next 3, and then see what happens. But we could start talking about crazy hypotheticals. I mean, I don't see it. It's a hot take. I like it. I like it for sure. But no, my list is pretty simple. I've got the University of Georgia coming in at number 1. Michigan well deserves to be number 2. They won't be on Tuesday, but they well deserve to be number 2. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Ohio State comes in at number 3 for me. TCU at number 4. I've actually got Oregon at number 5. They've looked a lot better on this last part of the season, and I think if there's one thing you can say about the playoff committee is they don't really care about the early losses. You lose a game at the very beginning of the year, especially if it's to a good team like, I don't know, say Georgia, then they're going to value that and say that you can improve over the last part of the year. And boy, have the Ducks looked better. And then I'm going to go ahead and put Tennessee as my little last player that should make the graphic on Tuesday night. I do think they should be punished. Obviously, dropping from 1 to 6 is a punishment there, but they didn't come out looking sharp. They didn't come out looking like a team ready to compete. They're not completely out of it. Again, some things could fall the right way, but you'd be talking about a possible, Georgia having to lose another couple, and then they make their championship game despite the tied record or whatever. And I don't know. I'm just not seeing the path for the Vols right now.
With Trey's scenario that no team survives the rest of the season undefeated, that opens the door back for Tennessee. Tennessee needs chaos. They need some of these, undefeated teams to fall, because that was, aside from Oregon's shellacking at the very beginning of the season, that was as uninspired a loss as I think you could have taken. They did not look sharp. The offense could not move the football. And that defense at times looked like the Tennessee defense that we expected them to be in the preseason. For me, so my first 4 are a projection of what we'll see on Tuesday night. And then I've got a hodgepodge of teams that I think are still alive in the spirit of the question. So Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU would be my 4 right now. Do I know if that's going to be the playoff ranking? Nope. Have no idea. They always seem to throw a wrench into the works, but TCU was the snub last week. Tennessee vacating that spot, Clemson vacating a spot, easily opens the door for them to be in the playoff rankings at least. So Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, teams that I have still alive. And I will give credit to Trey because I had completely forgot again that North Carolina only has 1 loss. So I've got LSU, Oregon, USC, North Carolina, UCLA, Ole Miss, Tennessee. No particular order. That is not a ranking at all. It's just the list of the teams that, as I thought of them, yes, they're still alive for a college football playoff berth. Some of them need more help than others. I think that LSU probably needs the most help in that they obviously have to win the SEC West, but I also think that uh they need they need chaos in some other parts of it. Now, if they win out and they beat Georgia, they're in. They've got to beat Georgia though, right? So they are backs against the wall. They've got to win out. But I also think there's going to be some sort of psychological barrier to the first two loss team. Now Auburn, like you talked about in 2017, they were in. Had they won that SEC championship game, they're in. Should probably be the same for LSU, but I don't know if we're completely sold on LSU being a playoff contender quite yet. We'll talk about that coming up. I do think Tennessee's still alive, but oh my gosh, they they need some help. Ole Miss, Garrett, to just counter what you were saying earlier, Ole Miss is very much alive. They've got one loss. If they
Sure.
beat Bama, they do need some help because they got shellacked by LSU, but a one loss SEC West champ, right? They would go to the SEC championship over LSU, yeah, if they only have one loss.
Correct. My point was more saying I don't think, or I think what I was trying to get at is more the idea that I don't see a way anyone's touching Georgia. In my scenario, I don't think Georgia loses a game. I know that in your scenario, Trey, where everyone's losing a game somewhere, then I guess Georgia might as well lose it in the championship game because I don't see where else they're going to lose it. But for me, I don't think that even I don't think you can count anything on the SEC West because an idea that I'm going to bring up today is I don't think there's that many very good teams left. I don't think there's that many very good teams in the country this year. I think overall the quality of each team has gone down across this country as opposed to maybe a few years ago. Whereas maybe a few years ago you would see a lot of teams who could say there's a real argument that they should win it. I think there's a lot of teams with some pretty big flaws, and there's some teams that I think are maybe more suspect that we're not talking about how suspect they are at this point. And if you had to make me pick just like my top four teams in terms of who I think is the most talented, I think it's going to look very different from what our rankings are going to indicate. And so there's still a path for a lot of these teams. I think there's still a way that a lot of these teams can make it in. And you're right. I mean, if Ole Miss wins out, if Ole Miss, goes through and as a one-loss conference champion over Georgia, that's a good enough resume to get in. I just kind of have no idea how that's going to happen. I don't think they're that good of a team to beat Georgia.
Trey,
Couple
before you jump
things.
in, I was completely wrong. LSU is top of the SEC West right now, so they went out. They're in. Ole Miss will need another loss from LSU to make it in. Go ahead.
Yeah, and to that point, I think you're talking about LSU needing a lot of help. I think they're actually the team on the outside right now that needs the least amount of help because if they roll through the rest of their schedule undefeated, I think they have 3 SEC games left. I know they play Arkansas and A&M. I'm not sure who the other opponent is, but they win those and then knock off Georgia. They're in, guys. Like 2 losses or not, the first one
You
is going to be
skipped over
explained
and
away.
knock off Georgia pretty quick there.
No. I'm saying if. This is all hypothetical, and we're talking about who is mathematically still alive. That was the original question, not
Okay.
who's going to make the playoff, because right now the playoff would be the 4 undefeated teams. So mathematically, who's still alive and what's making more than just 4 games interesting next weekend is LSU is the team that needs the least amount of help. They control their own destiny in the SEC West, and on in any given Saturday situation they knock off Georgia in the SEC championship, they're in. And,
Sure.
whatever happens to Georgia and the other teams after that, I don't think you leave them out for a Michigan or an Ohio State that didn't win their division. I don't think that you leave them out for a one loss Clemson ACC champion. I don't think you leave them out for a Pac 12 champion. So I think they would be in if they won the SEC. But again, a lot has to happen. There's a lot to be decided between now and the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and it's going to be crazy. That's just what I'm trying to get at. I think that anybody that's trying to tell you there's only 4 or 5 teams still alive, they haven't been watching college football that closely this year because it's been insane, and we can see a lot happen between now and the end.
It certainly has been crazy. Trey, I want to at some point, we might have to do this on the next show, but I want to see how you're mapping this out and actually get a projection because it seems like you have an idea of something happening that's like I don't know that I can see it. If you
I
think
can
that
do it right now, real
nobody's
quick. You want me
finishing
to?
Yeah.
nobody's finishing the season undefeated,
Yeah,
Yeah.
show your work. Go ahead. Show your
Georgia's
work.
close. Georgia's close is at Mississippi State, at Kentucky, Georgia Tech at home in a rivalry game, and then the champion of the SEC West. and they have not had a good history in the SEC championship
They
game.
just
They
decimated Tennessee, though. Is there a
okay.
better offense left on their schedule than Tennessee?
I wouldn't say decimated
That
Tennessee.
game wasn't close. If you watch that game
Well,
wasn't close.
it
Come on.
wasn't close, but because Tennessee couldn't score, I think they gave up
There's
a
We
couple.
multiple ways to decimate a team, and they did it
we've seen
defensively.
Georgia. Georgia looks amazing. Look, I ranked Georgia number 1 last week, guys. I'm fully on the Georgia bandwagon. I'm just saying that we've seen them struggle against worse teams than Mississippi State, Kentucky, and whoever wins the SEC West. We've seen them struggle against worse teams. Ohio
Sure.
State still has a bowl eligible Maryland and Michigan on the schedule. Michigan has Illinois and Ohio State. Whoever wins Ohio State, Michigan will get, whoever emerges from the shadow realm. That's probably where the scenario has the most trouble. I do think
Yeah.
if someone finishes undefeated, I think the most likely is either Ohio State or Michigan, just from a strength of schedule standpoint.
Right.
And TCU is a touchdown dog in the early lines next weekend.
Oh,
So
I agree. TCU's got a tough path. I don't think I see the path for the Dogs losing a game. Not after what
it's
they just
on the
showed me on
table, and
Saturday.
it wouldn't shock me because they just really don't have a good track record against the SEC West, especially in the SEC championship game.
I will say Georgia, if for whatever reason, if the scenario unfolds where Georgia doesn't smother Tennessee's offense, they can lose. So like if and quarterback at Mississippi State is just
Will
it,
Rogers.
Will Rogers. If he throws for 400 yards, Georgia might lose that game because I don't think Stetson Bennett can get in a gunslinging contest with an offense that can put up points in bunches. Now, is that a pipe dream considering how well Georgia's defense just played? Maybe so. But I do agree with Trey that it's at least on the table. I don't know that Georgia or a Michigan, Ohio State losing to someone other than each other is very realistic, but uh, we didn't think a lot of scenarios were realistic in 2007, and yet you had ultimate chaos, right? I mean, the backyard brawl,
Sure.
South Florida. So I do think that there's the path for a lot of different teams still on the table, and that
Oh,
was
there's
that was
certainly a path.
yeah.
I just think you have to start doing some real crazy gymnastics to get, Ole Miss into the playoff. Which again, it's not like they have a crazy path, or LSU even into the playoff. I just think it's not like the path itself is that crazy, but the things that you're having to skip over are, yeah, that number one offense with Hendon Hooker and everything else, and 5 touchdowns, Jalen Hyatt against Alabama. Yeah, they didn't score like anything
No,
against Georgia. I
no,
just
they
don't
did
see
not.
how you can skip over the fact that Georgia's playing some of the best football I've seen right now.
Yeah. Well, that defense was really good, and let's go ahead and get into it. As I talked about in the last show, I think the last recap was the first time that we broke this down. We're going to structure the recaps a little differently. We're going to hand out recaps of the contenders and their games. Some of them were not very interesting, so we'll blow by them, but we want to narrow the focus. So we'll do contenders. We'll then move into conference championship races. So games that impacted that, like Texas and Kansas State. And then we'll get into other fun games like SMU and Houston scoring all the points and making FBS history. But let's start at the top. Tennessee, Georgia. I was so wrong about this. I released my Saturday soliloquy, right? Every game day, I'm doing a video on Instagram. Mine this week was uh, on Tennessee and Georgia and how I thought there was a very real path to victory for Tennessee. I will say, I was listening to SiriusXM radio while driving around the Metroplex this weekend, and they were talking about how NFL scouts were projecting Tennessee was going to hang 50 plus on Georgia, that it was going to be a runaway train between the hedges. And it was the exact opposite. Georgia smothered Tennessee's offense. They scored 13 points, 1 touchdown, and that was very late in the game. It was basically a garbage time touchdown as Tennessee was just throwing everything against the wall. Stetson Bennett scored early. He scored often. The running game for Georgia was powerful. It was able to take Tennessee out of it. And then that defense, look, they schemed perfectly for Hendon Hooker. They did not allow the deep ball to be a threat. They didn't have the breakdowns on the back end that we saw so many other teams suffer from. And they blitzed Hendon Hooker. They got to the quarterback from a variety of different angles. In fact, they sacked Hendon Hooker 3 consecutive plays. Only 2 of them counted because one of them was a face mask penalty that gave Tennessee a first down on like 4th and 30. but they ran the same blitz 3 straight times, and every single time the free safety got home to Hendon Hooker. It just was a clinic in defensive scheming and blitz plays. I was so impressed with how Georgia played, and without a doubt, they're the top team in the country waking up today, tomorrow, on Tuesday night when they rank this.
Yeah, and I was on that before it was cool. So if you
Yes, you
were
were.
clowning
Yes, you
me
were.
for
Tip of the cap.
putting Georgia
Not
number one,
clowning. Not clowning.
no, no, no.
Just
There was some social media clownage that happened,
oh,
but
yes, yes. You did take some heat for that. Yes,
I
not
took a
not
little
from
heat
us.
on social. I think more for TCU, but yeah. Listen, this is one of the most talented teams in the country, and Garrett, I think you highlighted the talent discrepancy just on paper between these two teams on our preview show on Thursday. It's astounding when you just look at sheer numbers, Jimmy's and Joe's. Georgia is one of the most talented teams in the country, and Tennessee, you know, is not quite there yet from a depth and stability standpoint. They have an amazing quarterback that's having a Heisman caliber year, and that's why they're in the top five, and a great coach that can scheme offense with the best of them. So when you run into a buzzsaw like Georgia, it's gonna always be difficult. And when the Vegas line came out as like 10, I think it opened at 10 and it was bet down to 8 by kickoff. But that's just Vegas knowing that Georgia is still a really good team, even if they haven't shown it. So
Yeah.
they just took the ball out of Hendon Hooker's hands, plain and simple. They got a big lead in the first half, I think 21-3 or 24-3 at halftime. And they just kind of sat on the ball. And that's what Georgia can do because they weren't afraid of Tennessee getting back into the game. And they could have made an adjustment. They could have, if Tennessee scores coming out of the half, they can make an adjustment and turn it right back on. But they just kind of got the lead, sat on it, and took the air out of the football. And that's a good way to beat an offense that's scoring a bunch of points is just don't give them the ball. And that's what Georgia did. They confused Hendon Hooker with blitzes. They caused him to throw an interception for the first time since like week 3, I think, or something crazy like that. So can't say enough good things about this Georgia defense. And the offense did just enough, I will say, to back up my take about them maybe losing a game down the stretch. The offense still looks a little sloppy. They had a couple turnovers. Stetson looked great in the first half, and then just everyone kind of went to sleep in the second half. But I will say I want to see just a little bit more cohesiveness on offense before I'm like, yeah, they're definitely going to finish unscathed.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, apparently defense is still going to win you some championships. It's the cliche, but we live in this age of offensive prowess, and oh, it's impossible to make offense hard to do, and anyone can run a good offense and all that. We talk about that, but man, Georgia's defense is just at the most elite level that you could possibly be playing at in today's college football. And I think honestly, we could be looking back and talking about the early 2020s Georgia defense and sort of that rarefied air when we talk about historic units of all time, and we talk about, oh man, but do you remember those those teams back in the 90s and they did this and they I think we could be talking about Georgia just with what they do on defense, which is really strange given how the rules are right now. I think that you wouldn't expect to talk about a defense in today's day and age, but look, shame on any and all of us who doubted them and their ability to go repeat this thing. They are on top of everything. They're the kings of the hill, and they deserve to be there until someone else comes and take it from them. Tennessee, it just looks like they had a snowball's chance in hell. They went into Athens. The crowd was crazy.
Hmm.
They first possession they come out and they slow them down enough that they come out and they score a touchdown, and then they come out there. They had that crazy punt that went out at the 1, and then they have
Yep.
that whole sequence
75
on the
yard
goal
punt.
line. An
Yep.
insane punt, by the way, and the crowd was hype, and they should have been, right? There was just a rocket off his foot that rolled out at the 1. I mean, that was incredible. I get jazzed about that kind of stuff whenever you're talking about crazy special teams plays too. The thing I wanted to highlight with this is just in terms of the stat disparity. Georgia came into this game giving up 10.8 per game, and Tennessee came into this game scoring 45 per game. Something had to give, and it was clearly Tennessee's offense that gave. Georgia got to do what they wanted to do. We know what Georgia is. They statistically speak for themselves. Are they incredible on offense? No, they're not incredible on offense, right? They scored 27 points. And by the way, props to Tennessee's defense for holding them to 27. I know that they didn't have the
Sure.
best day. I know that there were some frustrating moments, And there are a couple blown coverages. There's that big one to I can't remember who, but they had a blown coverage
Probably
early in that
Lad
game.
McConkey, the
Yeah,
double move
McConkey.
down the
Yeah,
sideline. That was
yeah.
filthy.
But like, props to them. If you were to tell Tennessee fans, hey, Georgia scored 27 on Saturday, they would have been ecstatic, right? They would have been like, oh my gosh, we're going all the way. Book your tickets to Atlanta. And then you said, oh yeah, by the way, you only scored 13. They said, wait, I'm sure I heard you wrong. 30? No,
Yeah.
13. You only scored 13 points in this game. So props to them. Great job to them. And yeah, is the offense incredible? No. But your offense doesn't have to be incredible when your defense is at this level, right? Do I want to see him score more points? Yeah. I want to see him utilize Brock Bowers more. I want to see him establish somebody as a leader outside of the wide receiver core. I want to see him do more than just run the football. I'd like to see Stetson Bennett play a little bit better. At the same time, they don't have to right now. They really don't have to. They just played probably the best offense they could play, and they held him to 13 points.
Mhm.
Ohio State was running the same offensive numbers. I broke that down going into the show last week. That means that Ohio State should score about 13, and after what they did in Chicago, that sounds about right. It's not going to be pretty for people that play Georgia this year. This is why I think at this point I feel extremely comfortable having them cruise to a 15-0 and a repeat of the championship. For me, I think this knocks Tennessee out. I know we just talked about the playoffs and all the different paths for a bunch of people, but I think if you're talking about a team making it in that didn't even win their division, I think you're talking about Ohio State or Michigan, and I don't think you're talking about Tennessee. So that's just my perspective on this one. I know that we had a different conversation about that off the top, but that's where it comes down to for me. But this is all about Georgia just being the best team in the country by a mile.
Tennessee needs help. There's no doubt about it. The optics are not great. I think it's going to come down to who loses that Ohio State Michigan game and how they lose it, because that's probably going to be the nearest point of reference. Trady, what do you think?
Well, if you believe the All-State playoff predictor on ESPN's website, I plugged it in earlier today with Tennessee winning out and not making their conference championship game, and it said they have a 67% chance still to make the playoff. So I don't know where they're getting their numbers from, and I know that in the past it's been kind of a, haha, look at this, but that thing is usually somewhat accurate. So
Yeah.
I'll say I'll just throw that number out there. The most impressive stat to me for this game: Tennessee was held to 94 rushing yards and just over 2 yards per carry.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
insane.
incredible.
Like what I was highlighting last week with the Kentucky game is if you can contain Hendon Hooker's scrambling ability, you have a really good chance to shut down Tennessee. That's what Georgia did. 18 attempts for 17 yards for Hendon Hooker.
Yeah, not very good. I will say on that playoff predictor, if it was the Geico playoff predictor, I might trust it, but Allstate, not sure I'm in good hands.
They certainly have some interesting, like when Texas still technically I believe has a percentage chance at the playoff with 3
So does
losses, and
Utah. I think they're at
yeah.
like a 2% chance or
Yeah,
something.
so that
Believe
gets
Utes.
memed a lot. Let's go over to the SEC West now. LSU stuns Alabama 32-31. They go for 2 in overtime. I can't believe Saban got out coached in this game. Now, listen, Alabama's defense has been a liability this year, and it was a liability last night. They had no answer for Jaden Daniels. But Saban going for 2 early in the fourth quarter, I believe, and costing Alabama a point. They did not get it. They get stuff short of the goal line, and then you're really wishing for a point late in the game when LSU's tied it and sends you to overtime. It felt weird. It felt like for once in his career, Saban was mortal. That he was victim to the
Moment.
moment was too big for him. The atmosphere was too big for him, even as well. And just some strange coaching decisions up and down. Brian Kelly came out and won this game. Look, LSU's defense is fun. They flew around. They didn't necessarily contain Bryce Young throughout the longevity of the game, but they certainly had their moments. I know freshman Harold Perkins, for all of his drama, looked great last night as an edge rusher. They've had him as a spy, but then they also bring him on a lot of pressures. I think he had 7 quarterback pressures last night. What's your take on this? I mean, gosh, it feels like Alabama's season, for all intents and purposes, is kind of over. And maybe all of a sudden there's a window of opportunity opening in the SEC West, not only this year, but going forward as well.
Yeah, I want to start talking about LSU because I think they deserve for us to talk about them first and kind of give them their props. Look, after, kind of struggling to start the year, I wonder, man, how different could their season be right now if they just didn't gaff on that extra point in New Orleans, right? If they just didn't completely whiff and blow the end of that game, how different could their season actually be looking? But man, massive props to what Brian Kelly's done with LSU and to what he's been able to build there. He's still not a culture fit. You're never going to convince me that he fits at LSU, but you don't have to fit. I know if there's one thing those people like is if you're going to win. So you could be the weirdest guy just insulting these people to their faces. And if you're winning, they're kind of not going to care. That's going to kind of let you do what you want to do. So, great job by what he's been able to do. Jaden Daniels has looked really impressive. I think what he's been able to do and kind of revive his career, make himself relevant again. With LSU, I think it's awesome for him. Love the way he's playing. Lots of gumption, lots of just fighting. No quitting him right now. It's awesome to watch. I think LSU's cemented themselves as a top 10 team at this point. I think that they're for sure on their way to a BCS bowl. And if you believe Trey, maybe they could be, outside, playoff people. I'm ribbing a little bit, but I don't know. To talk about Alabama, earlier in this year, we were all together on the same day that Bama barely escaped Texas, right? They just barely escaped. We were all really concerned for them, saying, okay, what the heck? And I asked kind of jokingly, oh my gosh, is Saban washed? Like, is it over for Nick Saban? I think we might need to start having that conversation for real. I really do think we're starting to get to the point where, man, Nick Saban, I don't think he's got whatever it was. I think, I don't know if it's his age. I don't know if the game's starting to pass him a little bit. He made that, we talk about it all the time. He made the adjustment to be able to get that offense in the right place and to kind of change the way that they were going to do things on the offensive side of the football. That extended the dynasty. But I'm starting to wonder, like as recruiting has gotten a little bit better for a lot of these other programs, starting to kind of take the talent away from him. As you start to see them lose a couple of these extra games, get that on the locker room a little bit, like, is this the end of Nick Saban's, not tenure? Not, I'm not saying he's going to lose his job, but is this kind of the end of him being the absolute, unquestioned king of college football? And are we going to start to see him come back down to earth and see if maybe another dynasty can kind of rise up there? Is Kirby Smart ready to take his place up there at the top if they can repeat or even three-peat, right? Because I know that next year's schedule doesn't look too tough for the Dogs either. I mean, come on, you're talking about at Alabama. You got the reigning Heisman Trophy quarterback. You've got one of the best defensive ends that we've seen in years playing for you. You've got a stud of a running back who's averaging 6.8 per carry this year. I mean, you've got pieces. Your receivers, maybe they're not nearly as good as what they have been in the past, but you've got pieces. You should be able to commit this and scheme this in a way that you can start winning some of these bigger games. And here you are losing to Tennessee and LSU in the same year. I mean, they're a couple plays away from being, 8-4 if A&M calls a different play on the goal line, and if Texas can, make one more kick or extra point somewhere in that game. I mean, they've been pretty close this year, and man, I wonder if is it the edge? I don't know. It doesn't look like it's the same team. They're not nearly as physical. They're not playing at the same edge. I think this is the decline for Alabama. I think this is kind of the last year we're going to be talking about Bama being the unquestioned leader of this sport. They might still win another championship with him there. I still believe in his ability as a coach, but I don't think he's going to, have the advantages that he's had in the past.
Yeah, it certainly feels like Georgia and Alabama have kind of switched places, at least in their perception, in my mind, of where they rank nationally and in the SEC. Everything, whether or not this dynasty is over, whether or not, Saban is washed, that is all going to depend on what he does this offseason. This season, he's done. Like, they are not going to the playoff this season, barring some just absolutely hysterical breaking through of like an open shot to Atlanta and a shot at Georgia. And that doesn't look possible with Ole Miss and LSU both in their way and having, a loss ahead in the loss column and LSU basically having two games over them. So it looks like, the aspirations for this year are done. What he does this offseason is going to determine if the program is still up to that standard going forward because I think he has the two worst coordinators he's ever had at Alabama. Bill O'Brien needs to be gone before this season. Like he needs to be gone yesterday. I
So
don't
does
know
Pete
why we.
Golding.
Yes, exactly. Like
Yep.
it's the worst combination he's ever had. as a head coach, especially at Alabama. I feel very comfortable saying that. And I don't know if it's just that coordinator and assistant carousel finally catching up with him. I don't know if it's bad culture fits from the transfer portal. I don't know what it is. I do know that he had the highest ranked, by talent, average talent recruiting class last year. So it's not a talent issue. I wonder if it's a new generation of athlete that's just not responding to his type of coaching. I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before. He's been open about having to coach a different way the last couple of years because the kids just haven't responded to the way that he used to coach. And it's a new generation. If he can't adapt to that new generation of athlete that's coming to him, those kids aren't changing. And short of him, going to coach at a military academy, he's not going to get a different type of kid that's going to respond to a hard nosed same way he coached the rest of his career. So that's not an indictment on him. I'm not saying he abused anybody in the past. I'm not saying this new generation of athlete is too soft or anything like that. But it's a different generation of kid. And you have to adapt to that if you want to be successful with that type of kid. Because some coaches you can see are being successful with that, and others might be slipping away. So I don't want to make, one or two losses just an indictment on the whole man's career or on his future aspirations. But Jaden Daniels basically beat him single-handedly last night.
He did.
And if this was 2015 Alabama, the final score of that game is 21-3 Alabama.
Yeah.
Because he's going to take away, he's going to scheme and take away, and his defensive coordinator, he and his defensive coordinator, whoever it would be, Kirby or um, whoever it would just scheme that away. They would take away the best weapon, and LSU wouldn't have been able to move the ball. And in 2022, that's not what happened. He let one player beat him, probably for the first time since Bo Wallace was at Ole Miss.
Oh
So,
gosh, yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's scary if you're an Alabama fan right now. This is uncharted territory. You haven't been this pessimistic about your football program probably since 2006.
I wonder what they do with all their free time. I agree. Bill O'Brien, Pete Golding, both gotta go. They are not good. And I think a lot of it just seems like certainly defensively, it feels like, look, man, you got the some of the best talent in the country. I mean, you're constantly in the top 2 or 3 recruiting classes. Figure it out, man. Like you've got juniors and seniors. It's not like they're a young team. And yet Pete Golding just seems like he's unable to adjust. And especially when you have an athletic quarterback like Jaden Daniels. And it's not like he's just running the football. He threw it well against them last night as well. Poor tackling by the Bama secondary. I mean, it was not fun to watch if you were a Bama fan. I completely agree. I think there's a come to Jesus moment that needs to happen in Tuscaloosa, which is crazy to talk about that with 2 losses when other programs have that at 3, 4, 5 losses. But it is what it is.
I wonder if he was trying to be too cutting edge with the transfer portal because I think coming into the season we saw the addition of Jameer Gibbs and who was the corner. They also got the corner from
Ricks,
LSU.
Eli Ricks.
Yeah, Ricks, and we were like, "Oh goodness!" Like this transfer portal rule was supposed to even out the talent. And Alabama is just taking advantage of it more than anybody. I think what made Alabama so deadly was just the buy-in to the culture that
Yeah.
everyone in that building had. And if you bring in these transfers that are used to being the guy at their school, like Gibbs was at Georgia Tech. I'm not saying Gibbs is a cancer or anything like that. He's been a great weapon
He's
for
been
them, but
great.
just getting the same buy-in is way tougher when you get a guy out of the transfer portal versus, recruiting him for 2 or 3 years in high school and then having him show up as a freshman and earn that spot rather than just maybe it being given to him.
Yeah, I want to point to that is the big guy that I was thinking of was Tyler Harrell, the wide receiver that came over from Louisville,
Yeah,
and he has
absolutely.
not been a factor this year. I don't even know if he's really played or seen anything like significant on the field, but he just hasn't been a factor. He was supposed to be their best receiver, the next big name Bama receiver to go off and be considered for the bullet and all the other. It's like he was supposed to be that guy, and he hasn't played like I think if I remember correctly, I might be making this up, but if I remember correctly, earlier in the season there were rumors that there were like behavioral issues that was why he
Yeah.
couldn't make the roster and he couldn't end up getting on there. So that
Well,
goes to your point, Trey, that
he's on
it's
the team. He just I don't think
but
he's
yeah, he wasn't able to
playing a
actually
lot.
get into playing time and all that. But to your point, Trey, I mean that's a huge factor. Why? Like if he's a guy who doesn't have his head on straight and he's not locked into their process at Alabama, then that's going to not just affect him and the team that was counting on him to be the guy, but also affect the players around him who see that and say, I could do that too. So,
Let's move on and we'll kind of skip Ohio State Northwestern. Ugly game, torrential winds. It was 40-mile-an-hour gusts at times. Ohio State was at one point losing 7-0 to Northwestern. They do score 21 straight, but it was impossible to move the ball consistently in just some brutal conditions. I know that it wasn't an impressive win necessarily, but at the same time, Trey, I think you have in your notes, this is Big Ten football, right? I mean, this is what happens in November. You get out in the elements, and sometimes you got to win a game 21-7. Let's move on, those just for sake of time. Let's go to Notre Dame just exposing Clemson 35-14. The Irish take down the Tigers. Clemson cannot compete against a decent defense. DJU is not explosive or dynamic. He throws for 191 yards, one touchdown. It was just ugly. At one point, I think was it 28-0. Am I right on that? It was either 21-0 or no, it was 28-0.
28, yeah.
Clemson just couldn't get on the board. So, I think it's fun to see as people who have had to watch Clemson be one of the halves. And listen, Dabo Swinney's done a great job. He's built this program up from what was a hapless program. He's figured out how to recruit there. He's figured out how to win national championships there. But I think it's kind of nice for us with a national perspective to see a team that has victimized one of the worst conferences in sports, has had a cakewalk to at least the college football playoff several of these years, get humbled a little bit, right? Find their footing be a lot less even to some of these teams, and they've had close calls, but Notre Dame finally gets them. On the positive side, Trey, you always say talk about the team that won the game. Good for Marcus Freeman. We were seriously talking about bowl eligibility being a question for the Fighting Irish, and now you've got Marcus Freeman going viral for saying winning is addictive and how confident he feels about his program.
Yeah, can't say enough good things about Marcus Freeman. With the start that they had dating back to the Fiesta Bowl last year, and just really, really happy for him that he is finally starting to see some success and some really real success. I'm excited to see how they can close because they have a couple opportunities to, again, pull off some big upsets with the USC game coming up in a couple weeks. So, yeah, I mean, they were my lucky dog of the week 2 weeks in a row. They knock
Yep.
off a ranked ACC opponent 2 weeks in a row. They are 33-0 in their last 33 matchups against the ACC. Just absolutely insane dominance of that conference in the regular season. I think that the only slip up they had was in that ACC championship game in 2020 against Clemson. But yeah, you told the story, Mitch. When you lose to a team, and I'm not trying to throw shade at Drew Pine, but he was 9 of 17 for 85 yards and a touchdown. And when you lose to a team whose starting quarterback has that line and he didn't leave the game with an injury halfway through, you got some big problems on offense.
Yep.
And it's nothing we haven't already beat to death. When I woke up and turned on game day and saw that DJ was the starter, I was super confident because what that told me is Cade Klubnik was not ready. They gave him every opportunity to take that job over these 2 weeks. And look, the kid's talented, but he just wasn't ready. He came in through one pass and it was intercepted last night. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, this is what Clemson is in 2022, and this is what Clemson is without Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. They're a team with a really, really good defense who, when they come up against a team that can make them pay for mistakes, they're probably going to lose and they're probably not going to look very good doing it.
yeah. And to be clear, to start with Marcus Freeman and those boys, great job keeping your team together through a tough start to the season, right? I want to emphasize on that because they start the year obviously with the tough loss to Ohio State. They lose some. They're not really together as a locker room. It didn't seem like they were doing that well. It looked like the season was about to go down the toilet, and man, things just came together. He kept them together. He kept the team on the same page through some serious adversity. And man, like give this team a little bit of time, a little bit of talent, this program could be really good. And I think we're starting to talk about maybe Notre Dame coming up and being a serious contender and not just every couple of years they get the right to get smacked down by the number one seed, right? I think we could be talking about a serious contender here in the next couple of years if Freeman can keep these guys on the same page. But man, yikes. Clemson, girl, that was ugly. That was not great. This is a Notre Dame team that was starting to round into form, but none of us thought that the Tigers would get embarrassed like that. I mean, I didn't see that one coming at all. All of us thought, I think we even brought it up, like, which would be more surprising if Clemson blows out Notre Dame or if Notre Dame blew out Clemson. And I think it was way more surprising that Notre Dame blew out Clemson. It's probably starting to get to time where they need to think about the future on that offense. And, let's go get Cade Klubnik his licks, right? Get him his blow, just make sure he gets a chance to, you know, go through, get his lumps and start to learn a little bit about what it means to play at the college level, right? Practice reps are great. Game reps are a little bit more valuable. And if they want a chance to continue being successful, and continue to stay at the top as a program, they need to get their quarterback spot right. DJU not there. I think we probably had a little bit of the fool's gold from looking at him playing well against some not so good teams in the ACC when we thought they were pretty good. And maybe at the end of the day, he just wasn't that good, and those teams weren't that great on defense either. And now that they're playing teams that are starting to matter a little bit, and that are starting to actually be good teams, they're getting exposed. They're getting exposed for what they are. So ugly, ugly, ugly from Clemson, but it is what it is, and that's where they are at this point. But hats off to Notre Dame on this one. Great to see them succeed.
And we berated the Clemson offense, but Clemson's defense allowed 263 rushing yards to a team that was very clearly one-dimensional
Yeah.
and only completed passes to 3 different receivers on the night. So, like, it was just an overall bad performance, a team that just didn't look like they wanted to be there and played kinda scared, and that's not something we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing the poor offensive performances, but we're definitely not used to seeing that type of defensive performance.
South Bend, evidently something there is got the Tigers
Something in the
number. They've
water
lost
for
2 straight.
Clemson.
Huh?
So there's just something in the water for Clemson in Indiana, I
Evidently.
guess.
Evidently. Let's go to Michigan. I tell you what, they gave us a scare. They trailed Rutgers at the half, 52-17. Quick notes on this game from you guys. I was truly getting ready to kind of talk about, all right, Michigan, are we overrating them? Are we over respecting them? And then they came out and they got right in the second half, blew away the Scarlet Knights. Still obviously in the driver's seat, and that seems to be a sentiment that you guys both echo.
Well, I'm sorry that it wasn't windy, so that could be a really nice excuse for Michigan. So we could just excuse away their poor performance and maybe say oh, wait, they ended up winning 52-17, so it wasn't even a poor performance. Look, and I'm going to put this one to bed. I want to go ahead and try to go ahead and make my point here. Why are we still thinking that Ohio State is better than Michigan? Okay, I understand they are good traditionally. I understand they're fun. They have a fun offense. CJ Stroud plays well, unless it's windy or something. But if Michigan yesterday went on the road to Northwestern and it was windy and then they beat them 21-7, we would be talking about how Michigan's overrated. This is that Michigan team again, back to where there should be. They're just not explosive on offense. They're super limited. And instead, what do? They go to Rutgers, they get down to start, and then they score 21 points in under 2 minutes in the second half. Not 21 points in an entire game in Chicago, first off, but 21 points in like 2 minutes of game time. They didn't settle for field goals. That was one of my main concerns with Michigan's offense, was they'd been settling for too many field goals. And I think that was something that was going to come back to bite them, right? They're not finishing their drives. That wasn't a problem against Rutgers. And I'm hoping that's a sign of things to come, right? The Blake Corum show just continued rolling on. He had another good game. I would have liked to have seen them start the game a little better, obviously. I mean, I would have liked to have seen them not get down, but I'm not going to punish them, unlike the college football playoff, for getting down in a game. I'm not the college football playoff. I think you're allowed to trail in a game as long as you handle your business. And yeah, I will go ahead and take my shots at Ohio State, who we looked over. They have some question marks. This is not the first game they've struggled to score points in. This is not the first game they've struggled to pass the ball in. This is not the first time this year that they haven't looked good for extended periods of time in a game. Now, yes, they came back. They struggled. They had their struggle game, right? That you're allowed to have a struggle game. But in terms of just ranking teams for where they are right now, they had their struggle game. They've looked more susceptible than Michigan is. the college football playoff will not put Michigan ahead of Ohio State, but they should. They absolutely should. Michigan is the better team right now. They might still lose to Ohio State at the end of the year on the road. That's a tough place to play, but they are the better team right now. And if I had to pick a team to win, I would pick Michigan to win this just based on what I've seen to this point in the season. So I think Michigan's the better team. I still think by resume they're the better team here. Great job against Rutgers by coming back and scoring all those points in the third and fourth quarters. And I was waiting to go back to that one since we wanted to skip over Ohio State and their terrible performance. Answer me this, just honest feedback on this one. If Oregon played Colorado and won 21-7, but it was a little windy, would we be talking about them the same way we're talking about them today? If Georgia played
Yes.
Vanderbilt and won 21-7 and it was a little windy, would we be talking about them the same way we're talking about them today?
It was 40-mile-an-hour
My guy,
guys.
my
I
guy.
watched the game. I saw it. There's a punt that I remember the best
They
moment. I
couldn't
texted you
kick
about this.
field goals from more than 30 yards out.
Score
They were
touchdowns.
going
It's
one way.
Northwestern. It's Northwestern. Score touchdowns. Run the ball. It's
They did.
Northwestern.
They did in the second half, but listen,
How many? 21 points. That's not a
Garrett,
lot of points.
I don't think we're down on Michigan. I don't know why you're so
No, not at
combative
all.
about Michigan.
Not at all.
No, I'm talking about the national narrative right now that Michigan is not better than Ohio State. There's a national narrative that we should just slot Ohio State up there at 2. Let's not even think about it.
Well,
Well, 'cause-
okay, but you're the one that says teams are allowed to have bad games, and as long as they
Correct.
keep winning, it's okay. So why is Ohio State not allowed to have a bad
No,
game?
they're
in a
allowed to have a
tropical
bad
storm?
game. Obviously, they're allowed to have a bad game. But what I'm saying is, if you have a bad game and you come out and you don't look super impressive, but the teams that you're competing with for, positioning in the college football playoff, they come out there and look way more impressive, they deserve to be slotted higher than you.
Sure, and you know what? With Michigan's season is November 26th. Like
Sure.
they could stub their toe between now and then, and if they win on November 26th and they win the Big Ten championship, they are still in the playoff, and all will be right in the world. So Michigan's
And
going
to
to
be
have
clear,
a chance.
same thing for Ohio State.
Absolutely,
This whole
yeah.
season is one game.
Absolutely. And both of them have already played. The only other somewhat competent team that they'll play in Penn State. And
Sure.
listen, I'm not going to make excuses for Ohio State. I'm not going to fanboy for Ohio State. But Garrett, were you not mad at Dan Orlovsky for just trashing Kellen Mond against LSU in 2020 when it was some driving rainstorm? And they were like,
Sure.
why are they not
sure.
winning convincingly against this bad team?
Oh,
Like,
that-
Okay, but no, hold on. Not against a bad team. Okay, LSU was bad that year.
LSU was
They're
so
not
bad that year.
Northwestern. They're not Northwestern.
LSU
They're
was
not
so bad that
Vanderbilt.
year.
They're not Colorado. It's not these one-win teams that won maybe 50 years ago, and then we're just going to act like that one win against Hawaii or against Nebraska at the beginning of the year still means anything. This Northwestern team is a bad team who I guarantee you, if Michigan walked in there yesterday under the same conditions, they would have been able to run the football and score more points than 21.
All
Okay.
right,
You can take it to
I'm
the
gonna-
bank.
Let's move on.
Take it to
I'm
the
gonna
bank.
re-commandeer this because I'm not going down that hypothetical 50 minutes.
I'm just saying.
All right, moving on down to Fort Worth. TCU beats Texas Tech 34-24. Very physical play from TCU defense.